My name is Matt Weingarten. You can find me on Twitch at Bridge Overlord 201 if you're watching this on YouTube. About 5 years ago, I did a better bidding series during the onslaught of the pandemic, where I went through the convention card and talked about why I play certain things a certain way, and just gave my thought process around everything that goes along with that. But one comment that kind of stuck with me when I went through this document again, because I got like a ghost notification on it the other day, was that I'm happy to refine my system, and you should be too. You never know what you'll think of randomly. And in the last 5 years, my system has, the core of it is still the same, but there has been a lot of change. I've been playing with different partners who have recommended certain things. I've been talking to various players who have recommended certain treatments and given reasons for it. And all in all, the card that I was talking about then, while most of it's still the same, there definitely have been some changes. So I thought it's worth going through that again and talking about why I want to play this. And so we're going to do this for the 2025 edition. And naturally, of course, we'll do this in 5 years again, the 2030 edition, and so on and so forth until we're all old enough to actually be bridge players, instead of actually doing meaningful things with our lives. But all right, so the whole point of this series is we're going to go through the convention card. I'm going to walk through each section of this and fill it out and give my thought process for certain bids, what alternatives are out there, and why I think I am sticking with these. So let's go ahead and get started. One thing I'll prompt with is just talking about overall style. So I'm what people will call a boomer when it comes to bidding, a little more conservative than most in my demographic when it comes to bidding treatment. You'll see a lot of players out there today, especially kind of like in the higher tournaments, who open a lot of 11 counts. I'm not saying you shouldn't open 11 counts at all. There certainly are times and places for that. But I'm not going to open each and every single one of those. As long as you have the agreement to do so, that's not so bad. You just have to make sure you're going to be inviting a little more heavily in that case, and not just getting to like 11 versus 12 games that really just don't have a chance. But, that's just not the way I've typically played. I've also kind of like prided myself on being able to be a solid defender. So I've always felt like even if I don't necessarily open all the hands everybody else is, I'll be able to hopefully make up for it if I have to defend in a certain spot. I will say that you should open most 12 counts. I know the typical bridge text will suggest 13, but I think you gotta open 12 in today's bridge, except for maybe like the crappiest of the crap 12 counts. And just use overall good judgment when it comes to that. I think my partners know that for me, and this is a key thing, of course, when you're in an established partnership, is just knowing what each other's bidding style is actually like. So for me, it's a little more conservative, and for my partners, I know it'll be maybe slightly more aggressively, and so I'll just kind of like temper my expectations accordingly. And then I think as long as we're on that same page, everything will be okay. All right, so let's go through this card and start filling it out. I think today we're going to focus on starting with the one no trump section. And then even though it doesn't seem like much, I can talk so long that we'll end up probably having to split that across 2 different episodes. All right, so what we're going to play is we're going to play 2/1. Here's something that I opened very light. And of course, 2 clubs is a forcing opening. So when I first did this series, a few years ago, I was talking about 15 to 18 as being my no trump base. Now, I only play that with actually like maybe 2 partners, neither one of which I play with very much anymore. They actually both work for the ACBL, so that goes to show how much can actually change in 5 years. The reason we were playing 15 to 18 is, especially with, people, how everybody responds to like your one minor opening bids now. And, there are people who say, if I have a 4-card major, and maybe even as little as an ace, I'm going to try to respond. What ends up happening is if you have, your 2 no trump jump be like 18 to 19, or even the good 17 that you choose to upgrade because you don't think it's you think it's too good for 1 no, you end up in a very precarious 2 no trump contract, and it can be difficult to make that when you're just over half the deck. So in spite of that, we were thinking with 15 to 18, well, we're not going to be jumping to 2 no as often unless we are actually like meant to probably be there versus whatever your response is. And I'm not saying you should change your 1 level response, to that and actually have maybe more than just an ace. I think that's actually reasonable to do it that way. You might always catch the magic hand where you actually have a shot at game. Or on top of that, you take up space from the opponents by getting in there, not just letting them chime in more easily at the 1 level. So the other thing we were thinking about when it came to that was, just there's so often these times where you'll jump to 2 no trump and you'll catch like a 6 or 7 count and you'll be in 3 and you just can't make it for whatever reason. And so as kind of like a response to that, if you open 1 no with these 15 to 18 hands, you end up usually playing 1 no in those cases, and it's it's a breeze. Of course, there will be hands where three no trump makes, and I guess the ultimate question comes down to: do you want to kind of like take that anti-field possession, or do you want to take the field possession and hope you just make up through it in good judgment and or good card play? And I think especially when you're playing in these bigger events, it's probably better to be more in line with what the field is playing. I guess it really. I mean, there probably is a lot of psychology that goes into that. But I think ultimately for me, I'd like to, at least not lose out too often in the bidding for those types of judgment calls. There will be plenty where I do, but I think, with that in mind, I'm gonna just play a normal no trump opening as we go through this card, which for me would be good 14 to 17. And for me, a good 14 count is going to almost always involve a 5-card suit. Not just any 5-card suit, something with some texture. Ace 5, 4, 3 deuce is not like a 5-card suit worth getting very optimistic about. So it's going to have some spots in that case. It'll be a hand where if I opened, one of a minor, one of a major, and then I ended up bidding one no at some later point, I wouldn't be disappointed in missing out on game. If I just caught partner with that minimal 11 count or maybe a good 10 count. So I think with that in mind, I am going to stretch it and kind of like loosen this range, so to say. So we will open this with 5-card majors. I know people will have expectations. Well, if I have 5 cards in this major, I'm going to have 3 in the other. I really don't think that's the case. I mean, certainly you could play that kind of like style, but I think you lose more often than not. I think to me, the answer to the question is, should I open a no trump? Does the hand look like it's a no trump opener? 5-card majors, sure. 6-card minors, sure. 5-4, 2-2 hands that are better than kind of like just bidding and responding in different suit. Yes, you just have to take a look at your hand, and if there's a chance and it's not unreasonable to open a no trump, I'm going to try to, because I think more often than not that's going to allow us to better describe my hand and gauge where we actually belong instead of being a more open-ended bid. So that's just kind of my thought process on the 1-no openings. In terms of playing systems on, I think the default thing to usually put here is like double or 2 clubs. We typically have system for how we handle other bids, but what I would say is that double or 2 clubs are almost never natural. Well, maybe double is if it's meant to be penalty. But 2 clubs is almost never natural anymore. It's usually like majors, or it's clubs in some different suits. So obviously you want to make sure you have what I call defenses to defenses, or maybe that's even offense. But you want to make sure you have treatments around those various no trump defenses. So we'll say systems on, but keep in mind, and I'm happy to talk about that maybe in an episode on the no trump bids, or just maybe at some other point talk about how I have treatments against different no defenses, because it is important to note that, because these do come up enough. People like to get in the way of 1-no openers to really make it more difficult, so you want to make sure you are able to counter that effectively to lead to the best spot for your side. In terms of what we're going to fill out here, we're going to say Stayman, and I'm happy to talk about like the different variations of Stayman, and we're going to talk about transfers. I'll talk about how we will super accept on those transfers, and then maybe a good stopping point for today would be the 2 spades and 2 no bids. All right, so let's talk about Stayman. So first thing, when I talk about this, we are going to not play 4-way transfers, which so 2 spades is not just strictly a transfer to clubs, and 2 no trump isn't just strictly a transfer to diamonds, so I will mention that up front. So if I bid 2 clubs, I am promising a major in that context, which I think does have its advantages. So in terms of the different types of Stayman that can come up, you'll have your typical where you're just gauging for a major, and you'll either invite or raise the major, or jump the game or do whatever based on that. But there's also what I would call crawling Stayman. Crawling Stayman is something like I am 5-4 in the majors. When I say 4-5 in the majors, and I have a weak hand. So if I'm 4-5 in the majors, and I'm going to specify why I say 4-5 exactly. Which is actually one of the things that's changed in the last 5 years. Maybe I'll make sure to mention when those things have changed, just so we can reflect on what the series looked like then compared to what it is now. But what I do with a 4-5 major weak hand is I'll start with 2 clubs, and then if partner responds 2 diamonds, having no major, I'll just bid 2 hearts, which shows exactly that shape. So partner either passes or corrects if they think the 4-3 spade fit's going to be better, and we just play wherever in that case. Now, what I would have said a while ago is, you could actually show a 5-4 hand with that same shape. You could bid 2 spades in that case with 5-4, and then it would just show the opposite. Of course, in this case, partner probably isn't correcting the 3 hearts, because you don't want to correct at the 3 level when partner's only showing the weak hand, so you basically almost just always play 2 spades in that case. Or you could even make it nebulous, but I think the issue with nebulous is you just are striking out on what fit to play in. So with those hands with 5 spades that are weak, even if they have 4 hearts on the side, I think the way people will play it is you'll play that over a statement response. 2 spades is just like a unbalanced hand with 5 spades, and is like a light invite. When I say light invite, maybe it's just like, maybe a 5-5, 7 count that if partner does have a fit with, has a shot at game. Now, you wouldn't really have a good way to uncover this otherwise, unless you were to just take an aggressive stab after transferring. So the advantage of bidding it this way is you can gauge, those tight spots that you wouldn't have kind of like if you were just playing a different style. So the trade-off with this is, you can't show like that 5-4 hand effectively where you go through stamen and you miss out on potentially playing a 4-4 heart fit. That is a downside. But the upside, I think, of getting to those tight games probably outweighs that. So to answer the question of, well, what do I do with a 5-4 major weak hand? If you're not strong enough to even call it like that light invite, like maybe you just have a 3 or 4 count, you just transfer to spades. So yes, you lose out on a potentially 8 or even a 9-card fit, 9-card heart fit, because partners certainly could have 5 hearts for their 1 to trump over there. But maybe they'll back into the auction and you'll be able to do something, or you kind of just have to live with those spots because nothing is necessarily perfect in those situations. So just to reiterate, so with crawling stamen, I'm only reserving that for the 4-5 major hand. With the 5-4 major hand, I will either, bid 2 spades to partner's stamen response, assuming it's not like 2 hearts in that case, or I will transfer to 2 spades and just call it that. And that, that 2 spade response to the, 2 diamond response, or even 2 hearts if I can't tolerate hearts, doesn't necessarily, promise, especially over 2 diamonds, it doesn't promise hearts. It's just any type of, light invite with at least 5 spades. Well, exactly 5 spades, sorry. In terms of other types of stamen, there's one that I call, well, I think it's called extended Texas, which is where after the 2 diamonds response, you actually still play Texas transfers, which is where, 4 diamonds is a transfer to hearts and 4 hearts is a transfer to spades, and that's reserved for like the 6-4 major hands. The reason for that is, if you have the 4-4 fit, you might want to advocate playing that instead of like your 6-2 or your 6-3 fit, because once you're done pulling trump, you could use that 6-card suit for pitches. You wouldn't be able to do that if you were playing in that as your trump suit. So there is something to be said about playing that. So in that case, when partner gives a 2 diamond response, you just, Texas into your 6-card suit, and then you play your known major fit. Another one that I'll talk about, I'll talk about within this video is what we'll call kind of like, and this is definitely not like the standard treatment, so I'll just mention that up front, but it's for the hands where I have a 4-card major and a 6-card minor. Now, typically, if you had something like that and you didn't have a strong hand, you would just transfer to your minor, and that would be that. But I actually kind of like flip that, and with I will actually go through stamen with this hand. And what I will do in that case is if it goes 2 clubs, if partner bids my major, perfect. We just play, it's kind of like garbage stamen in that case. I just drop in, that suit if we have the fit, and so be it. But if they respond 2 diamonds or they respond to the other major that I don't have, I will then bid 3 of my minor. For a lot of people, that would be forcing. That's a standard treatment for that to be forcing in that situation. But like I said, I'm flipping that. And in this case, what I'll do is I'll bid 3 of a minor, which is a drop dead, which shows, hey, I couldn't tolerate, your statement response, but I do have this minor. So you are still able to show that hand. It gives you an extra shot of uncovering a major fit. And so you are still able to convey that without losing out on anything. So that's kind of like just my statement in a nutshell. So to reiterate, you got your classic statement, you got your classic garbage statement, you have the crawling statement, which is now just for the 4-5 hand. You have your extended statement for Texas sequences, and then you have like what we would call this funny jump system, which allows you to handle those 6-4 minor major hands. So transfers, two diamonds and two hearts. Those are just your typical transfers. And by the way, for chat, if you guys do have questions, you're allowed to ask. I will be able to address those. That is the reason why I try to live stream this and then I upload it to YouTube. We'll talk more about the transfers and like how we accept over that after I talk about the two spades and two no bids. So two spades is what we call a size ask or clubs. So this is kind of a four-way transfer, but not really. Basically, two spades is what you would play like your normal like two no invite as after one no, or if you played a four-way transfer system, what you would do after going through non-promissory statement with two clubs. It basically just asks partner if they're at the bottom of their top of their bid. It says nothing else at that point. So partner with a minimum, the good 14, 15, or 16 count that they just don't think is worth, accepting for game. They'll bid 2-no, and then a max hand will actually bid 3 clubs. The hand that you think is worth upgrading, or it's just at the top of the range. If you had just clubs, you pass 3 clubs. And if you had just clubs after 2-no, you just correct the 3 clubs. And then you can show different types of hands after 3 clubs if you actually were interested in, going forward with clubs, which I can definitely talk about. But that is what that is. And then 2-no, well, if we think through the permutation of possibilities, obviously it involves diamonds or both minors weak. So if you have a hand that's weak with both minors, say maybe you have a forward count with, like 5-5 and clubs and diamonds, you're kind of stuck in just like your typical like one no trump system. Do you just transfer to a suit and hope that's the best fit? Or you could bid 2-no, which basically tells partner to bid their better minor. And when I say bid their better minor, you do have to take this with a grain of salt because you should be trying to preference into diamonds more often than not, just for the ability that you don't necessarily wrong side those contracts where a partner had nothing but diamonds. So, maybe if you're within a card of those two suits being equal, you should probably bid diamonds in that case, but it gives you the extra chance of uncovering a better club fit in those situations. So, like if I open a no trump with, ace, king, fourth of clubs, and maybe 2 low diamonds and partner bids 2-no. I'm going to bid 3 clubs in that situation. And then partner can correct, which again isn't great because we, wrong-sided it in that sense. But if partner just actually has maybe an option to get out in 3 clubs, then we play potentially a better contract in that regard. So that's the left side of the card for these one no trump bids. I think the next video will go to the right-hand side and just talk about some more things there. But going back to these transfers and the different follow-ups. So the standard treatment for super accepts with your 2 major transfers is that you would just jump to 3 with at least 4 cards in a max. But I think there is a good reason to be able to just jump when you have the fit, regardless of it being a minimum or a maximum, because it also does take out room at the same time. Of course, you got to be careful with this. You don't necessarily want to stretch that, vulnerable against not. But if I do have a, maybe a non 4-3-3, hand where I have that 9-card fit with partner at least, I will then jump to 3 major, which conveys that. And what do I do with a max in that situation? Having 4 cards at a max. The way that one of my partners and I have thought about it is we actually bid 2 major plus 1. So if partner's transferring to hearts with 2 diamonds, we bid 2 spades, and if partner's transferring to spades with 2 hearts, we bid 2 no trump. Now, what you might see the robots play on BBO for those super accepts is that they'll super accept into their doubleton to show to convey some shape. That is a reasonable treatment. We just start with 1 bid. It actually works well because we have a series of kind of like follow-up responses to that where we're actually able to show shortness from the responder's point of view at a low level, which allows us to better kind of like start our engines towards slam if we think that's where we belong. But you could play whatever. I was just suggesting one thing, but I would say I'm not too strict when it comes, or I'm not too picky when it comes to how we play super accepts, just as long as we're on the same page of, whether we kind of like 2-tier it, where we have like the minimums and maximums, or if we're just doing it for the maximums, in which case you just gotta keep that in mind in terms of how you're responding to that in those situations. When it comes to the 2 spades and 2 no bids, which show either the size ask or clubs, or in the case of 2 no diamonds or both minors weak. So if there is a follow-up bid to those 2 spade responses, or the two no bid. What does that mean? So when we're going through Stayman, I did mention that with the weak hands with the 6-4 minor major, I would start by going through two clubs, which typically you would go through doing transfer. So in the spirit of like switching those around, we actually have the ability to show the 6-4 by responding to that with three major. So the auction, one no, two spades, whatever my response is, two no or three clubs, three hearts or three spades shows four of that major along with having the original club suit. Likewise with two no, after the three clubs or three diamond response, three hearts and three spades are the same thing. Now you could flip the major in the spirit of kind of trying to right side the contract. I don't really have a super strong preference on that. Usually if you're gunning for beyond game and potential slam interest, I don't think there necessarily is a strong. I don't know if there's a strict benefit to handling it one way, because you're not necessarily wrong siding anything at that point. It's just based on what I think is best for conserving space. For one partner and I, that is actually bidding the major we have. For other people, it might be flipping it around. It's just based on agreement if you're going to play something like that. So that would be what you would do with like those minor major hands. And then what you might do with, one no, two spades, two no or three clubs, three diamonds is that might be your generic, hey, I have shortness, which is typically what you would bid like three major as in the just typical four-way transfer system, because then you wouldn't actually have a four-card major. So, three diamonds is like my generic shortness, which, just prompts a relay, and then I can define exactly what that is. Similarly for one no, for the two no response, you can do something similar based on whether it's three clubs or three diamonds. If I'm not bidding three major, I can then show shortness in some way, shape, or form. I'm not going to go into all those responses. I'm happy to share my notes on that with anybody who is curious, but just giving a little bit of a thought process there. All right, I think that's the left-hand section of the card. Maybe what we'll do, because I don't think we're necessarily adding too much here, is I'll just talk about the three-level bids as well, and then give a glimpse into what I'll talk about next time, where I'll cover maybe this, and then cross over into the 2-no and 3-no bids, because there isn't as much there either. So, three clubs, I play as Puppet Stayman, and when I say Puppet, one thing that you'll often hear people talk about with this is you play what's called LIPS, Low Info Puppet Stayman. In typical Puppet Stayman, you'll show like let's talk about typical Puppet Stayman in the context of opening 2-no trump. Like the classical Puppet Stayman is 2-no, three clubs. The responses are, three hearts and three spades show a 5-card major. 3-no denies a 4 or 5-card major, and then three diamonds denies a 5 but promises at least one 4-card major. When I say low info, I say low info in the meaning that, I only show the 5-card major if I have it. So I will always bid three diamonds without a 5-card major. So three hearts and three spades stay the same, but three diamonds just denies a 5-card major. Doesn't promise anything about a 4. This is advantageous because defenders aren't going to necessarily know what to lead against 3-no. Often if you mention that you have a certain major, they're going to go out of their way to avoid leading that major. Here, they may still end up leading it because they don't know if you actually have that or not, which definitely works to your advantage. Plus, you don't lose anything in the process. Partner is still able to bid normally. Partner will then bid three of the other major to show that they have a 4-card major there, which you can either, then follow up with 3-no, which just denies that major but that says nothing about the other major, or you just, get to your normal, major suit contract when you actually did have 4 for that fitting major. So I think the one caveat to pick from this, though, not that I think people would do this, but if that's the case, you should respond, three clubs puppet to 1-no with 4-4 in the majors. Because if it was 4-4, partner's going to bid three diamonds, and you don't have a good way to show that, hey, you had both. You actually only have to show, you only can show one or the other. Maybe, I think in typical Puppet Stayman world, you can bid like 4 diamonds as a follow-up to the 3-diamond response to show both. But here you're not going to do that. If you're 4-4 in the majors, and even with game forcing strength, just go through 2 clubs. Just do it that way. This should be reserved for, looking for a 5-3 fit, always. You might have 4 of the other major, but that's kind of like the basis of it at least. Three diamonds. Three diamonds is gonna be 5/5 at least with strong minors. And then three hearts and three spades are your splinter bids. And when I say splinter, I mean that I have 3-1-5-4, and then 1-3-5-4. I do know people who will actually bid the tripleton in that case, which is where they actually flip those two bids. So three hearts is 1-3-5-4, and three spades is 3-1-5-4. The advantage with that is you avoid the lead directing double. Although maybe they just alter their double to mean that, but if they haven't been able to discuss that before, they're not going to be able to. Often people are going to double if they want you to lead that singleton. Here, you can actually have the opposite effect where you kind of like put them in a tizzy where they're not able to do that. So that's the logic behind that, because effectively you lose nothing. But I'm not too much of a stickler for that. By the way, the disadvantage of doing that would be if you ended up having a 5-3 major fit, you would wrong-side it in that case, because then you would be playing it from the side of the person who has the weaker hand with three of them. So that is the one downside. So you could do it either way, but again, not super strong preference here. So I'll just go with the typical 3-1-5-4, and then I'll do 1-3-5-4 here. All right, I think that's a good stopping point. So in this episode, just to recap, I just kind of went through the whole idea of wanting to go through this series again. I then started with the one no part, talked about my no trump range, the various treatments I play, talking about Stayman and transfers and two spade size ask, and then just the 3-level bids as well, where there isn't too much going on there. I think for the next episode, we'll talk about these other conventions here. Texas transfers are pretty self-explanatory, but we'll talk about Smolin, Lebensal, because I have changed what I play for Lebensal compared to what I did then. How you should handle interference with double, with the use of negative doubles, and then we'll get into the 2-no and 3-no level bids, and then make our way through this card. But yeah, hopefully you guys like this series. I'm going to try to do this once a week, so for people who want to catch it live on Twitch, you should be able to. Probably try to do it on Fridays. Today is Friday, by the way, for those who watch this at some later point in time. But can't necessarily guarantee that, but we'll try to do my best to do so. But thank you, everybody, for watching.